these attacks against surrounding countries, Syria, Yemen, Iran, they really show the strength and determination of the axis of resistance against imperialism and the United Front for the Palestinian resistance. If the United States and Israel weren't trying to land grab in the region to try to consolidate their political power, it would show that the resistance is not nearly as strong. But the fact that they're doing this tells us that they have no other choice.
Welcome to Fight Back Radio, a production of fightbacknews.org, taking you to the heart of the people's struggle. I'm your host, Richard Berg, and I'm happy to be here today. This is actually the second introduction I'm doing for this interview because a couple of things happened right after we completed the interview. We completed the interview on Wednesday, and then Thursday, the Israelis bombed Iran, and they killed a number of top military leaders and scientists. They did damage to the missile defense and nuclear program that Iran has. And Iran has called this an unprovoked war and declaration of war by Israel. And that's what it is. Iran responded today, Friday, so as I'm recording this intro, we're going to release on Monday. They've sent hundreds of missiles at Tel Aviv. Some hit, and some people were injured or killed. There was fires, and I expect this will expand the war in the Middle East, and it's just Israel just won't give up on the war, and the United States is behind it. The United States government funds the Israeli army. The people that have been killed in the genocide in Gaza, in Syria, in Lebanon, Yemen. These are all people being killed with weapons funded by the United States, and it's unconscionable. And it's as people of conscience, we need to stand up and push back on these things. We need to continue to raise the issue and to fight around these things. And so I wanted to get that in there because otherwise it would sound like like we didn't know what was going on with this interview. But I want to assure you that Emerson Wolfe, who's our guest today, and she's the leader of Palestine Solidarity Grand Rapids, which is an organization in western Michigan that has stood up consistently and persistently on behalf of the people of Palestine, and especially those in Gaza in the last year and a half, or coming on 2 years pretty soon. And so they're doing a walk from Grand Rapids to Lansing, which is the capital of Michigan, to raise awareness about what's going on in Palestine. And so I'm sure you're going to enjoy this interview. Before we get into it, though, I want to raise one other thing that's happened since then. Trump and his people with ICE and Homeland Security, the FBI, and even the Marines have invaded Los Angeles, and the people of Los Angeles have fought back. These raids, and just scooping up mothers and fathers, sitting in front of the Home Depot waiting for work, just with the presumption that they're not citizens. And so it's been a battle in Los Angeles for the last several days, and people in the community have stood up and supported each other, it's inspiring to see what the people of Los Angeles have done. Now, Trump has started to expand some of this to other cities, and we've had protests here in Chicago and other cities around the country where, again, people have risen up in large numbers to push back against snatching parents from their children. And, and these are people, I should say, many of the people that have been arrested and detained, some are citizens, some are waiting for citizenship, but some of them were tricked because they were following all the legal procedures And so they were told to come to a certain place to fill out forms or whatever, and they just grabbed them, and without due process, without legal procedures, and so it's like the rule of law is getting swept under the table by Donald Trump. And so, so these are going on. I want to also mention a friend of ours, a friend of Fight Back Radio from the Centro CSO, Alejandro Orellana. Alejandro, his home was raided by the FBI. He lives in Los Angeles. He was born and raised in East LA. He's a member of the Teamsters Union and a community leader. And they grabbed him, and they grabbed all of his electronic, everything that he owns that's electronic. The U.S. attorney has said that they're charging him with conspiracy to commit civil disorder. This is a person who has been, an upstanding person who has, fought for the rights of Chicano and Mexicano people and Latino people in Southern California. He has called for the equal rights of everyone, and this is a disaster. And I encourage people to support Alejandro however they can. I will put in the show notes. He's a working class guy, so this is going to cost some money. So we'll put in the show notes how you can support him. But you can contact Centro CSO in Los Angeles, and we'll put some of that in the show notes as well. But I encourage you to support Alejandro. Finally, I want to get back to Palestine, which is what our show is about today. And Emerson Wolfe, who has been organizing people in Grand Rapids to support the Palestinians for some time. We've seen, and people tend to forget this because we're, over a year and a half into it, but people are dying there right now. The Israeli government, the bombing of Iran is the new thing, but for quite some time they've been literally starving people in Gaza, and people that are weak and starving to death that go for food. They've opened fire. They've killed scores of women and children, mothers and fathers, as they try to get food for themselves and their families. And it's tragic, and so I think you'll find this interview with Emerson very fascinating, because he's somebody who's really been on top of it and stood up and organized against it, and it's done as an example of what we all should be doing. So here's our interview for today, Emerson Wolfe. We're lucky to have Emerson Wolfe with us today, who is going to talk a little bit about what's going on in Palestine, but also what they're doing in Grand Rapids to resist there. So welcome to Fight Back Radio, Emerson.
Thank you, Richard. I'm really excited to be here. Thank you.
Yes. So I want to start out by asking you about Palestine Solidarity Grand Rapids. What is that? When did it start? What's your mission? What are you guys trying to do? And, how do you see yourself in relationship to the rest of the movement?
Great question. So Palestine Solidarity Grand Rapids started in 2021 with that siege on Gaza. It was the 14th major bombardment of the Gaza Strip in 14 years, and people's political consciousness around the Palestinian fight for liberation was starting to awaken. And so a group of socialists were very open about that, as well as some Palestinian youth came together to hold street signs on a corner, and it was all ages. We had elders who had been in the anti-war movement for decades. We had Palestinian youth whose families who had been displaced from around Palestine, all coming together in West Michigan to raise their voices for Palestine and to uplift the struggle that Gaza was experiencing. Israel has this tendency to, bombard over and over and over and then back off a little bit as soon as they get too much attention in the mainstream media and on the global stage. And so once that bombardment sort of subsided, the group went dormant for a little while. And it wasn't until the crisis in October 2023 that our membership and I'm so sorry for using this word, exploded for lack of a better word. We saw people who were really motivated and catalyzed by what was happening in Gaza, wanting to find somewhere to put all of their grief and their anger and their frustration. And so we saw hundreds and hundreds of people showing up in the streets of Grand Rapids in October 2023. As a little personal anecdote, to contextualize the mission of the group, I've been active in the BDS movement since the early 2010s, organizing against pinkwashing in Vancouver, British Columbia, where I used to live. And I was aware of the struggle for Palestinian liberation as a high schooler during the start of the Iraq War in the early 2000s. But when the initial reports of the Al-Aqsa flood came in, I posted a TikTok and I said that completely without context, sometimes violence is necessary to resist decades of horrific dehumanization and apartheid. That when you push a people over and over and over again to their breaking point, as Israel has, when you take away everything someone has to live for, that something like the Al-Aqsa flood is inevitable. To contextualize that, I consider myself or considered myself a pacifist for most of my life. I am a meditation teacher and I'm a yoga teacher. And so I'm not a violent person. But I saw the struggle that Palestinians have gone through for 7+ decades. And I knew that this was going to be a catalyst for an entire generation of anti-war activists who are going to see this struggle for liberation and see how interconnected it was to every other struggle around the world, and that we needed to provide a place for them, a political home for those people to put their feelings of rage and grief and frustration. And so I joined Palestine Solidarity Grand Rapids because it's a liberationist group. We
Yeah.
don't mince words about that. We want to model a principled political line that supports the Palestinian right to resist apartheid, genocide, and frankly, the ongoing Holocaust that's happening in Gaza. When we call it a war or a conflict, we're obfuscating the situation. In reality, this is the extermination of an entire people, a way of life, a culture, and a language. And so we wanted to create a space that combated all of the rhetoric that was anti-resistance and that was not explicitly anti-capitalist or anti-imperialist. And so Palestine Solidarity Grand Rapids, our mission as a liberationist group is to call for the end of the siege on Gaza, the return of all political prisoners that are being held in Israeli jails. Children as young as 12 years old are being held in horrible conditions in Israel. There are reports of mass starvation and sexual assault and abuse. And these are children, people of all ages who are being held without any charges in Israeli prisons. So we also call for the end of U.S. aid to Israel. We recognize the complicity of U.S. taxpayers, but especially the U.S. government in perpetuating the genocide and the Holocaust in Gaza. We know that it's our hard-earned tax dollars that have been funding this for decades now, and have increased to record numbers under the Biden administration. And so we call for the end of our tax dollars paying for the genocide. But ultimately, we're trying to uplift the consciousness of West Michigan around Palestinian liberation, but imperialism in general. Politically, the context of Grand Rapids is very interesting because it's a fairly conservative enclave, right? People are familiar with the DeVos family. The DeVos family essentially owns Grand Rapids. They're billionaires. They're linked to Blackwater with Eric Prince. They're in private military contracting. They have a lot of money. And so Grand Rapids tends to be very conservative and tends to fall in line with that power structure. However, it has been skewing Democrat in the last few elections. And that's not to say that Grand Rapids is becoming any more progressive or politically left, but that perhaps the Democratic Party is becoming more and more centrist and conservative. So that's the
Wow.
political context that we're operating within. Grand Rapids is a fairly small, mid-sized city. We've got less than 200,000 people in the city at large. So the fact that we can get 500, 600 people out to a rally for Palestine is unprecedented for us.
So yeah, let me follow up with that. I mean, so first, our Fight Back Radio listeners, the DeVos family, you may remember, Betsy DeVos was the Secretary of Education under Donald Trump in his first term as President of the United States, and if you listen to Fight Back Radio, I come out of the Chicago Teachers Union, and a lot of the privatization and taking money out of public education and putting it into private education and charter schools was engineered by her. And but also, some of what you said, I'm interested in, because here in Chicago, thumbnail sketch of Michigan, people look at it as like the Upper Peninsula and Western Michigan people view as conservative, and then Detroit is where the more progressive views tend to come from. And that may be wrong, but that's the views that people here have sometimes. And so I'm curious about you've talked about people coming out into the streets to support you. And my follow-ups are first, so the strong support that you've gotten, why do you think that is? And secondly, how does how do the average Joe or Jane in Grand Rapids, how do they view what you guys are doing? How are you received? Do people throw rocks at you, or do they give you hugs?
First, I want to comment on the DeVos family's tendency to destroy public education, because that's absolutely true. And I think that West Michigan was the battleground to test that for the national stage. A lot of the public education has been shifted over to charter schools that are owned by the DeVos family. And through that, they get to legally enforce religious education through public taxpayers, through public tax money. So I think that, we look at the individual local level in some of these cities, we can see the initial inklings of what happens on the national stage. So it's really, really important to pay attention to local movements. When it comes to how we're received, we've had antagonizers at our rallies, but overwhelmingly, it's like 30-1. We have 30 to 50 supporters for every one person who says something negative, who flips us off. In the very beginning, the end of 2023, the beginning of 2024, we had very violent antagonizers. We generally try to have family-friendly rallies. We want a place where our elders, youth, undocumented folks, disabled folks can come out and express their political feelings and be with like-minded people, and learn together. And so while we have done some more direct actions and things that are a little bit riskier, we try to have a place where everybody can come out. And so these folks are by and large peaceful. They're chanting on a street corner. They're doing education. They're leafleting. And when we're faced with this antagonism, it's largely people who are saying the most depraved and horrific things that you can imagine. I'm not going to repeat them because I'm not trying to traumatize our audience here today. But I found that people who support Israel, by and large, are just for a place to put their violence, which to me mirrors what Israeli policy does toward Palestinians. I say that the general public receives us quite well. We have a lot of different political tendencies in our group. It truly is a group for the masses of people. We have folks who skew a little bit more conservative. We have folks who are a little bit more liberal. We have socialists. We have anarchists. And Palestine Solidarity Grand Rapids is a place for everybody who supports the liberation of Palestine to come together and to express that support.
Okay. So I wanted to ask you next about an action that you're doing, and it's you're going to do a walk for Palestine. And correct me if I'm wrong here. I have June 26th to June 30th. And so could you tell us a little bit, what's that all about? What are you trying to accomplish with this, and maybe some of the logistics, and how our Fight Back Radio listeners can support that.
Yeah, absolutely. So we are doing a walk against genocide from June 26th through June 30th. It's over the course of 5 days. We're walking 70 plus, I think it's about 75 miles from Grand Rapids to the state capital in Lansing. On our way, we'll be stopping in smaller cities such as Lowell, Ionia, Portland, Grand Ledge, and then finally stopping in Lansing. we're hoping to do education in some of these smaller communities that don't necessarily have a large Palestine solidarity movement like we do in West Michigan or in East Michigan. We're doing education. We're building partnerships with churches and community groups in those areas to build a strong contingent in West Michigan of folks who believe in Palestinian liberation. But ultimately, we're uplifting the struggle that Palestinian children are facing. You know, Gaza was predominantly children, over 50% children prior to October 7th, 2023. And that's because they had to survive 5 separate sieges in 18 years to even become an adult. And so, as you can imagine, if you're experiencing bombardment after bombardment after bombardment, your chance of surviving goes drastically down. And so the population skews younger and younger and younger. And so a lot of the people affected by this Holocaust in Gaza are children. Whole family lines have been decimated, and leaving just sole survivors who are children, young children oftentimes. And so we wanted to uplift that to the media. Unfortunately, one of my friends said recently, people in the United States, all they tend to care about internationally are children and puppies. And so that grabs the media's attention. So we're looking to uplift the struggle of Palestinian liberation up to the media to get more people's attention, especially now during this moment of humanitarian crisis. So we started planning this, and then we also started seeing, information about the March to Gaza. We've got the Madeleine and the Freedom Flotilla going to give humanitarian aid to Gaza, and people who are planning to march to the border to the crossing with Egypt to enforce humanitarian aid going into Gaza. And so we have the opportunity here in West Michigan to sort of mirror that. One thing that I've been saying to people is that this is going to be a grueling experience. I don't know what it's like to march 75 miles. I've never had to do it. None of us are athletes. We are people of all ages and all abilities. We have teenagers all the way up to people who are in their mid 70s who are planning to march with us. But it's a very, very small taste of what it's like to be displaced, right? We're marching from place to place. Our food is out of our control. We are at the whim of communities that will be housing and feeding us. We'll be staying in tents against the weather. It's going to be hot at the end of June. We can anticipate 90-degree weather while we're doing this. It's going to be medically dangerous, but it's also necessary because so many people say, well, this doesn't affect us here in West Michigan, so why should I care about Palestine? When the reality is, it's our tax dollars that are going to pay for this Holocaust in Gaza. We are responsible financially and morally for what's happening to the Palestinians. So the onus is on us to experience what that's like so we can contextualize that in people's bodies. So we've put together a little bit of a manifesto on why we're marching. And so those points of unity are because Palestine is about collective liberation, right? To march for Palestine is to stand up against militarization, racism, settler colonialism, environmental destruction. It's not just about Gaza, it's about all of us. Because the Gaza genocide is a climate crisis, right? More than 281,000 pounds of CO2 has been dropped in just 3 months. That's a figure for 3 months. And that's worsening the global climate crisis. It's destroying ecosystems. It's poisoning the water. So this is a climate crisis. It's a war on children, as I've already talked about. Tens of thousands of children have been murdered by Israel, and hundreds of thousands more have been displaced or maimed, traumatized for life, and that's on us. As I said, this is a Holocaust. We've gone well beyond conflict, war, ethnic cleansing, genocide. This is all about the all-out extermination of a people. That's fundamentally wrong. And so we want to uplift that to not only the media, but to the people of West Michigan. our systems of oppression are interlinked. We know that the rise in cop cities around the United States is directly linked to, officers training with Israeli occupying forces over in Israel. The militarization that they use in Gaza and against Palestinians is tested on them and then brought over to Western nations and enforced on people in the United States to suppress protest movements. So it's our responsibility to talk about that and to name that and to own the fact that our resources locally are going into the militarized policing of people abroad. Because international law is being shredded, right? The United States subverts UN proclamations over and over and over again, from illegal settlements to collective punishments. Israel has repeatedly violated international law.
Yeah.
Because our tax dollars fund this, right? I've talked about that already, but I think the figure is something almost, it's close to $100 million per year comes from Michigan, in the form of tax dollars that are given to Israel for military purposes. That's a lot of money that could be spent on housing people and feeding people here at home. And frankly, the war economy has to end. Um, $440 billion has been awarded by the Department of Defense to private military contracts in 2023 alone. $440 billion. That's an insane figure. That money could be better spent doing research and development that makes life better for everybody instead of putting it in the hands and pockets of just a few billionaires. And ultimately, we're marching because we want to reclaim our humanity. Because every single person who is participating in this march, or every single organization that is endorsing this march against genocide, wants to reclaim a small piece of their humanity. We're uplifting two organizations while we do this. It's a fundraiser. So, we want to uplift this to the media. We want to provide education, but ultimately this is a fundraiser effort. So we're fundraising for two organizations, Heal Palestine. Heal Palestine brings injured children from Gaza for life-saving medical interventions in the United States. But they take a holistic three-pronged approach that also involves not only physical medical care, but mental health care and education tools to resettle and help families thrive, and Playgrounds for Palestine. And what Playgrounds for Palestine does is they build playgrounds in displacement camps for Palestinian children, so they can uplift the right of a child under UN resolutions. So one, a little bit of medical care because we've decimated Gaza's medical infrastructure, and two, a little bit of joy in the lives of Palestinian children because frankly, they deserve to be children.
Yeah, no, that's fab. That's really important work, and it's appreciated. Thank you for that. We'll put in the show notes, how we can talk afterwards how people can get with the Palestine Solidarity Grand Rapids to donate money or whatever, so you can get it to those organizations. And so,
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, even real quick, I can say that we're looking for people to walk with us. We're looking for people to volunteer. This is going to be a massive undertaking, keeping our volunteers safe on the side of the road. So we want people who can do bike safety, who can drive our gear vehicles, who can provide accommodations in the cities that we're going to be in. And folks can go to PalestineSolidarityGR.org for all of the information that they need, whether it's the GoFundMe. We're also selling t-shirts as a fundraiser. So if you want something in exchange for for your money, you can donate for a t-shirt. We've got some pretty cool ones, hot pink, neon green, neon orange, and plain white if that's your thing. But a lot of people are trending to the hot pink, I've got to say.
well, that's good. That's noticeable then. So PalestineSolidarityGR.org. So go there as soon as you're done listening to this episode, and volunteer or buy a shirt or give them some money, whatever you can do to support the cause. I wanted to circle back to for those of us that have been following Palestine on and off. It seemed like there was some hope not that long ago. There was a lot of talk about a ceasefire, and the Israelis were, we won't negotiate with Hamas, and they were, and there was intermediators, and then it looked like, okay, there was three phases, and we don't agree on phase two, but it looked like they had an agreement finally, and now it doesn't look like that at all. It looks like devastation. Can you talk a little bit about the ceasefire agreement and what happened there, and why this is all starting over again?
Yeah, it's very interesting. From the beginning, Palestine Solidarity Grand Rapids has tried to stay away from the ceasefire conversation because it frames everything that's happening to Palestinians in the wrong context, right? When we talk about a ceasefire, we essentially legitimize calling this a war or a conflict. And this is not, nor has it ever been, a war or a conflict. That's the wrong framework. This isn't a war, this is a genocide. This is a Holocaust, and you can't negotiate with somebody who is intentionally trying to commit large-scale atrocities and war crimes. Um, Israel has openly declared that the killing will continue until there's no more Palestinians, and they've proven it with their actions time and time again when they disrespect every single temporary ceasefire agreement in both Gaza and in Lebanon. Um, so I'm really bad at keeping up with mainstream media. So I don't know what the mainstream media is saying in places like the United States. I tend to look at more direct sources. I think that Al Jazeera is the most mainstream news media that I consume. But we can see that, US media is backed by corporate interests that also have holdings in military contracting. And so they want to uphold this US hegemony. And so they keep talking about this ceasefire agreement over and over and over again because they want to frame this as a war or as a conflict because it decontextualizes it from the genocide that's happening against the Palestinian people. Um, for the ceasefire agreement, a ceasefire would mean that the resistance forces also have to stop fighting. They have to stop fighting for liberation. They have to stop fighting for the right to return to the land that is entitled to them. They have to stop fighting for the lives of the thousands of people who are held captive in Israeli prisons. And if I were them, I wouldn't want to do that. But we see that the resistance forces are at the table time and time again. For 20 months, they've been demanding an end to the genocide and the return of all Palestinian prisoners. But it's not the resistance forces that are stalling the process or disrupting the process through phase one, two, three, or whatever we want to call it. It's Israel. Time and time again. It's the United States proxy state, Israel. And it's they refuse to negotiate in good faith. It's this sort of do as I say, not as I do mentality. They want to have their cake and eat it too. They want to demand that the resistance forces stop fighting and stop demanding the right to survive, demanding the right to live unencumbered by violence, to have, clean water and food and safe housing. But Israel wants to kill Palestinians with impunity, and they've enjoyed decades of impunity and any sort of accountability because they have the backing of the United States, both financially and politically. We've seen time and time again that through ceasefire agreements, they keep bombing. Anytime they release Palestinian prisoners, they kidnap them again, and if they don't kidnap them again, they target them through drone strikes. Israel has killed almost 200 journalists in the last 20 months. These things are insane. They would be unconscionable in any other time, but we've normalized this. We've normalized this through the continual advancement that Israel has done over the last 7 decades, going from bombing to peacetime, and antagonizing the Palestinians into, trying to fight back and then responding with disproportionate show of force. So again, the ceasefire framework is all wrong because you can't negotiate with somebody who is trying to commit a genocide. It's our responsibility to fight back against that, right? That's enshrined in the United Nations, the UN resolution. I think it's 45/130. I could be wrong on that. It reaffirms the legitimacy of a people to resist and to struggle against violent colonialism, apartheid, occupation, up to and including armed struggle. So it's not the Palestinians who are doing anything wrong. They're at the table. They're trying to negotiate and do the right thing. It's Israel who's operating in bad faith, and they have been.
Yeah, yeah. So could you talk a little bit about what it looks like on the ground there right now? And well, first, thank you for that. But it's like you've mentioned you're raising money for for playgrounds and for health, and I asked about the ceasefire, and since it's there was a minute where there was some prisoner exchange and stuff like that, and people went back to their homes, but now Israel has went back in there in a very aggressive way, and people are dying every day. There's at the beginning of the war, they cut off electricity, water, and food, and now there's been some changes. People have been trying to get food in there. Could you talk a little bit about some of that stuff and what's going on there right now? And in the news lately, we've seen that the Israeli military has opened fire on people trying to get food, and I mean it's stunning to me. But could you talk about that a little bit?
Absolutely. First, I want to clarify that it wasn't at, the start of this most recent siege in October 2023 that Israel was denying Palestinians resources. Palestinians never had control of their own water sources. They never had control of their water wells. It's always been under Israeli control, and Israel has historically poisoned those wells time and time again to try to keep the Palestinians under their control, right? If you have a chronically dehydrated population, you have a population of people who is experiencing exhaustion and brain fog and medical complications, and then are weakened and can't fight back for their own liberation. So that is one of the many ways that Israel has controlled the Palestinian struggle for liberation over the past several decades. And it's only gotten worse since October 2023. And more recently, it's come to an absolutely horrific head, right? There's not been humanitarian aid, save I think 7 aid trucks that has entered Gaza in over 3 months at this point. And when it comes to those humanitarian aid trucks, 2 of them were carrying Muslim burial shrouds. So they weren't even letting in food. They were effectively saying, you're as good as dead. We will not be giving you any food or any water. We will just be allowing you to bury your dead or to enshroud your dead. At this point, hundreds of thousands of people are at risk of starvation. They're, effectively solidifying their intent, Israel is, to starve the Gazan people to death. Postpartum women are unable to feed their children because babies can't drink water, they can't eat food, they can only have breast milk or formula, and there's no formula getting into Gaza right now. And postpartum women are they're starving. So their bodies are unable to produce breast milk, which means that you're seeing images of infants in Gaza that are literally skin and bones. It's disgusting and it's horrific. Almost 3,000 children under the age of 5 were just declared as diagnosed with acute malnutrition. And that was just 3,000 children within the last couple of weeks, like the last couple of weeks of May alone, 3,000 children. And there are only 4 stabilization centers in Gaza that can treat acute malnutrition. The 2 that existed in North Gaza are now closed because North Gaza has been absolutely decimated. And so people in North Gaza are now not only at risk of severe malnutrition, but they have to walk miles and miles and miles to get any sort of humanitarian aid or to get any sort of medical attention. And when you are starving, there's no way you can walk thousands and thousands of miles. So we're seeing these images of children who are skin and bones because they're starving to death. We're seeing videos of old men who have survived siege after siege after siege, crying, openly weeping over a single piece of bread or a couple grains of rice because they are starving. There is nothing for them to eat. The new strategy in the Holocaust is to install aid checkpoints. I'm sure a lot of people have heard about these humanitarian aid checkpoints, but they're controlled by United States-backed military contractors. And the person who owns this supposed humanitarian aid foundation, one of the co-founders, is a former CIA agent, former CIA director, I think. They're trying to subvert the already established UN humanitarian aid structure, right? The United Nations has a long history of providing humanitarian aid in war zones, in conflict zones, or in suppressed developing nations. They have a structure that is effective and it works. But this gives Israel and the United States an out, right? It's optics for them. They can say, "Oh, we're giving aid, we're giving aid," when in reality they're not, right? The resistance forces have said since day one that this is a ruse to try to trap Palestinians and contain them. It creates absolute chaos. Israel controls where these aid centers are. There are none in North Gaza. They're all in South Gaza. I believe there are, I want to say four, but they keep closing them and then promising to reopening others. So I'm not entirely sure at this point how many humanitarian aid centers there are, but effectively they're designed to displace Palestinians again and again and again. It puts them in severe danger. When somebody who's starving from North Gaza has to walk 15 miles to get to a humanitarian aid checkpoint in the south of Gaza, they have to cross military zones to get there, which means they risk being shot, they risk being bombed, and we already know that that's a strategy that Israel employs, right? They tend to shoot Palestinians in the kneecaps or in the groin to either immobilize them and make them unable to travel, or to commit, a Holocaust effectively and make it so they're unable to reproduce. And so these are the strategies that Israel is employing to try to control the narrative and also control the population. Over 100 people have already been murdered at these checkpoints. These military contractors have just opened fire into this containment zone where Palestinians are queued up to get even just a little bit of bread or rice. And it's outright chaos designed to undermine the humanitarian efforts that already exist. There are hundreds of trucks at these checkpoints trying to get into Gaza. We've got the Madeleine and the Freedom Flotilla traveling to Gaza with more humanitarian aid. We should be relying on these institutions that already exist to provide this sort of humanitarian aid, rather than setting up some sort of militarized situation that puts people in danger and puts lives at risk. They're making the situation far worse.
Yeah, purposefully, as you say. That's terrible. I want to ask you about, the international movement. It's to support the Palestinians. The movement that Palestine Solidarity Grand Rapids is a part of. It's all over the world. It's in, I think, every country, and you see protests around the world. In Europe, in Africa, in Middle East, Asia, whatever. I can name the whole world. Name a country, and there's something going. There's Palestinian flags flying, and this has had the effect of isolating Israel and the United States. And I was wondering if could you talk a little bit about this international movement and how you relate to it and what hopes you have for it.
Absolutely. Palestine Solidarity Grand Rapids are internationalists. We believe that international solidarity is one of the most important tenets of organizing. To comment on the isolation that Israel and the United States are experiencing, I think we just had the perfect example of that, right? At the UN Security Council, they were voting to enact a ceasefire and end the genocide. And 14 of the 15 voting countries voted in favor to end the genocide, with the sole holdout being the United States with their veto power. So again and again and again, the United States chooses to isolate itself. But what I think we're really seeing here is that the class contradictions are increasing on a global scale. People overwhelmingly support Palestine. Whether they support the Palestinian resistance is another question altogether, but they overwhelmingly support the people of Palestine because they see that this is a major humanitarian crisis. They're able to name it as a genocide, and they're starting to see that this is an outright Holocaust that's happening. So we're witnessing the interconnectedness of monopoly capital, of settler colonialism, and of United States imperialism playing out in real time. And that political isolation that the US and Israel are starting to experience is a natural consequence of those governments perpetuating a genocide. I think we're going to continue to see these contradictions heighten as the political consciousness around the world increases. But ultimately, we need a wide-scale class consciousness that can really drive this movement in the United States in order to take control of the political machinery that perpetuates monopoly capitalism and imperialism at large. I think that the movement for international solidarity and liberation for Palestine itself is the catalyst that gets us to class consciousness. But it's not enough to stop the machine until we're able to have large-scale class consciousness in the United States. So people are waking up to how the billionaire class is so deeply invested in the war machine, right? Imperialism and war profiteering go hand in hand. And if we want to combat imperialism, we have to combat the hypermilitarization and warmongering that's happening that keeps perpetuating things like this genocide in Palestine. But we also need to rapidly unlearn decades of anti-socialist propaganda that keeps people sort of detached and separated from their power as workers. I think that Michigan is a really good example of military contracting increasing and the power of workers. So Gretchen Whitmer has called for an increase in defense contracts and military spending, building more manufacturing sites where we can create weapons of destruction that are dropped on children in Gaza. Whitmer says that these are good jobs that will feed your family, but in reality, they're steeped in blood money because the workers, while they're separated from the ultimate goal of their job, which is to, create machines that perpetuate war and put money in the pockets of billionaires, they can start to see the connections of how to use their power to subvert and deconstruct those systems when they pay attention to the international solidarity movement, right? We need strong unions that are led by politically conscious and disciplined people. Otherwise, the most fascist elements of our society will continue taking control and lead us into open fascism. But I believe in the power of the working class. I believe that if we can build strong, politically motivated unions that are allied with international solidarity, that are allied with Palestinian liberation, then that will ultimately benefit the workers of the United States. It will enable us to stop spending so many of our tax dollars on sending bombs to Israel and instead redirect that money into necessary social spending in the United States, uplifting people of the working class, poor families, people in the Black Belt South, the Chicano Nation. These struggles are all interconnected, and it's through a strong class conscious movement that we can ultimately change the structures that inform imperialism.
Yeah, no, well put, well put. But I do want to make a point that what you said there, I think, is was all encompassing, and this idea of class consciousness and class conscious and fighting unions, which is the background I come out of, is very important. And we're seeing Trump's most recent budget calls for major increases in the military spending while he's shutting down veteran affairs hospitals and things that laying off many thousands of people who work to try to keep our water clean and our air clean. and so all the things that we need, as as transit, in bus lines and trains in big cities are being cut back, and our environment's going down the toilet. Where we continue to spend more and more money on war, and especially this war in Israel. That Israel's waging against the Palestinian people, or this, I shouldn't say war, I should use Holocaust, your word.
Yeah, it's not a war, it's absolutely a Holocaust.
Yes, absolutely. So thank you for that. But I want to go back to ask you a little bit about the region around Palestine, and the Israelis have used there was a crisis in Syria where the U.S. And many forces, Turkey, others, tried to create a crisis for the government in Syria, and eventually overthrew it. And Syria was an ally of the Palestinians. As I'll mention, in Yemen, the government there has been allied with the Palestinians, and they've been getting bombed. The Hezbollah in Lebanon, and so there's been inordinate pressure put on all these peoples. And Israel has grabbed some of the land in Syria already, and promise. There's promise of more of these kinds of things, and threats against the Iranians as well. Could you talk a little bit about the region and how people, countries and movements that have supported the Palestinians, and how they've fared over the last period?
Yeah, absolutely. So you did mention, Israel has already illegally occupied parts of Syria well before the fall of Bashar al-Assad's regime in Syria. They've been illegally occupying the Golan Heights for a while now. And I think that was just a precursor and a little bit of foreshadowing around what the United States and Israel have planned for the region. I think that these attacks against surrounding countries, Syria, Yemen, Iran, they really show the strength and determination of the axis of resistance against imperialism and the United Front for the Palestinian resistance. Because if the United States and Israel weren't trying to land grab in the region to try to consolidate their political power, it would show that the resistance is not nearly as strong. But the fact that they're doing this tells us that they have no other choice. They're trying to consolidate as much power as they can because, as we talked about earlier, the US and Israel are becoming increasingly isolated on the global political stage. And so they need more allies in Southwest Asia and North Africa in order to maintain that US hegemony and that domination over resources. And so, as you said, Syria was a major player in the axis of resistance, funneling resources through Syria to the resistance in Palestine. And part of the game plan between Israel and the United States to overthrow al-Assad's government was to destabilize that resistance, to eliminate that path that the Palestinians were receiving aid from. They don't care about humanitarian rights, the United States and Israel. If they cared about humanitarian rights, then they wouldn't be perpetuating a genocide against Palestinians by and large. And so the media narrative that we have to overthrow Assad's regime because of humanitarian needs and the Syrian people are looking for liberation, I think that's incredibly manipulative. They're capitalizing on maybe an organic movement for liberation in Syria, which is not mine as someone in the United States to say whether or not that's good or bad. People have their feelings about their own government. There are people in the United States that have feelings about our government, and that's our right. But it's not our place as people in the United States to destabilize an entire government and an entire system and way of being for our own purposes, which is ultimately what the U.S. does time and time again around the world. It was ultimately a key domino for the axis of resistance that the United States needed to push over in order to escalate things in favor of the United States, because Israel fails time and time again when it comes to ground invasion. They failed in Palestine, they're failing in Lebanon. The only thing that Israel has going for it is the billions of dollars that the United States gives it for research and development into surveillance and AI technology that helps refine and fine tune their ability to drop bombs on people from afar. And so, that's part and parcel. If they have more land, if they have more political sway and acumen in Southwest Asia, then they have another piece in their arsenal outside of the failed ground invasions. When it comes to Yemen, Yemen, frankly, deserves our respect and solidarity, hands down. They've been one of the most effective and vocal supporters of the resistance, and they're one of the poorest nations in the world by design because the United States has deprived them of self-determination time and time again. They strike blow after blow against U.S. imperialism and against U.S. interests, and it's respectable, the fact that they're able to keep their determination and their resiliency and their support for Palestinian liberation because they know that their struggle is connected with the Palestinian struggle and with the Lebanese struggle and with the Iranian struggle against U.S. imperialism and global hegemony. An increase in conflicts with Yemen shows that they are a real credible threat to the depravity of U.S. and Israeli interests in Palestine, hands down.
Yeah, yeah. More recently, the United States actually unilaterally has been negotiating with Iran, and a lot of it's over the enrichment of uranium and concern about Iran getting a nuclear bomb, which Israel already has, and there was some negotiations during the Obama administration, which Trump negated as soon as he got elected, and then also there's been negotiations and discussions with Hezbollah, who's been both of those two are amongst the most staunch allies that the Palestinians have had in the world, and so the pressure on them has been intense. But what should we make of these negotiations and talks, and how should the movement be looking at this?
Absolutely. So I think when it comes to Hezbollah in Lebanon specifically, I think that shows evidence of the strength of the United Front for the Palestinian resistance, right? But again, it's another do as I say, not as I do situation when it comes to like the historic ceasefire agreements that Israel, the United States, and Hezbollah have come to in Lebanon. The US and Israel like to agree to certain conditions within a ceasefire agreement on paper, but not in reality, not in practice. Yes, when it comes to negotiations with Iran, I mean, we see that, yeah, they're having conversations about nuclear uranium enrichment, and Iran says, oh, we want uranium for peaceful purposes, for research and development. We're not trying to develop nuclear weapons. Iran, the United States vehemently combats that and says it doesn't matter what you're doing it for. We don't want you to have nuclear weapons. But you're right, Israel already has nuclear weapons. And I think that is another notch in the belt that ultimately restricts Israel's ability to say that this is a war against Palestinians, because a war isn't a situation where one side has nuclear weapons and the other side has sticks and stones, right? That's not a war. This is very clearly a genocide that's happening. But I don't think that it's the United States' place to say what other countries are doing. It can't be this do as I say, not as I do situation, right? The United States accounts for 40% of global military spending around the world, and that's more than the next 10 countries combined. We have 750 plus known military bases around the world. So other countries developing nuclear weapons is frankly just another response to that global U.S. hegemony enemy, and it's well within their right to resist the violent destabilization that the United States instigates in other countries. The United States has issued sanctions against Iran, economic sanctions, and now there's also a travel ban against Iranian citizens to the United States, to try to force their hand and demand that they not develop the means to defend themselves. The nuclear armament movement is terrifying, frankly. Countries shouldn't have the ability to wipe an entire nation off the map in a matter of seconds, but that's where the technology is at this point. And the United States shouldn't be the global bully telling people what they are and are not allowed to do, while also dropping things like white phosphorus bombs that burn people to the bones. It's horrific, and it's a contradiction that is making people realize just how bad the United States is when it comes to the hyper-militarization.
No, I think you're right. I think that's part of that's why they're becoming more isolated, even if governments knew that all along. People's now learning it and putting pressure on folks. I wanted to ask you, you've done a good job, Emerson, about talking about the false narrative that the United States and Israel have put out there of, oh, this is a war between terrorists or whatever, or, two sides that just can't get along and agree. This, as you pointed out at the start of this interview, this goes back. I mean, it was, the Balfour Declaration, the British, and, the Nakba. There's been decades and decades of moves to try to wipe out the Palestinians. And this is, whatever, it's escalated to this point. It's a heightened point. But also consciousness and resistance around the world is heightened as well. So I wanted to ask you, about the end game for this. You talked about liberation for the Palestinians, and how do we get from where we are to some sort of some measure of justice in Palestine?
Oh, that is a very, very difficult question. It's difficult to predict the future, but I think that we can look at real material conditions and analyze them using concrete methods, to try to find the path forward. And that's going to look different around the world, right? There is no such thing as one global people. Every culture and every society is different and has their own separate material needs. So in terms of Palestinian liberation, one, I think we have to uplift and support the Palestinian resistance fighters, the united front of all of the different resistance groups that exist in Palestine that have come together to fight for their own liberation and their own self-determination. So as, people who believe in international solidarity, we uplift that struggle. We don't decide for them what they need, whether, we try to talk about a two-state solution or a one-state solution. We've had a two-state solution, right? The Oslo Accords in 1995 effectively instituted a two-state solution, and this is where we are right now. We're in a Holocaust. So that ship has clearly sailed. We need to uplift the struggle of Palestinians and really pay attention to the methods that they're using, what material conditions they're in, so we can use those examples locally in our own local movements. Right? My struggle for liberation against capitalists in Grand Rapids, Michigan is going to look very, very different from the struggle for liberation in Tucson, for example, or in Germany or in Australia. We really have to be practice dialectics and look at the contradictions that are inherent in everything that we do, truly examine the situations that we're in with honesty, and use that to practice moving forward, right? We have to examine the situation and then practice. It's not enough to just read theory and to think about things. We have to act it out through our bodies. I said at the beginning of this, I'm a meditation and yoga teacher, and one thing that I teach my students is that knowledge is an embodied practice. You can know something intellectually, but it's not until you practice that intellectual knowledge that you're actually able to know and have consciousness around it. You have to change something. You have to experience something for you to know what that knowledge truly is. And so organizing is very much the same. And organizing in an anti-capitalist framework or an anti-imperialist framework is very much about the practice of what you're doing. So you do something, you examine and analyze it, and then you bring that back to the drawing board and you say, what worked? What didn't work? What lessons did I learn from this? And then you take those lessons and you move forward again in practice. But you can't just do this by yourself, right? It's not enough to be individualistic and adventuristic and just go out there and do things because you're feeling a vibe. You have to actually do things with other people. Ask other people what their experience is, which is when I say we uplift the Palestinian liberation struggle because that's their experience. They are the experts of their reality. We're the experts of our reality. And so we have to work together across lines of difference, create that united front with people who we don't always necessarily agree with. And at this time in the United States, that's creating a united front against people who support Trump and the various fascist elements that are trying to take control of our government, and building a movement that can actually combat that through practice and integration, practice and integration.
Oh, that's good. I want to talk to you a little bit about your reality in Michigan. The last elections, Michigan was a hotbed place when Kamala Harris was running against Trump. And the reason is, well, there's many reasons, but one of the reasons, one of the hot button issues was what we're talking about today, which is Palestine. And there's lots of Palestinians and Arab people that live in Michigan. There's people of conscience that live in Michigan, like yourself. And this issue, I mean, famously, the mayor of Dearborn refused to meet with Biden's campaign people because of what was going on in Gaza, and he said, "Let's talk about that, first." And so I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the elections, and how you approached it. With what was, because we had at that time, Biden was the president of the United States, Kamala Harris was the vice president. So I want to ask you, is there a difference between that administration and Trump in terms of how they approach Palestine and the Middle East in this issue particularly? But then also, a little bit about how this issue did play out, because there was a lot of talk about it ahead of time. Here we are now, a few months later. How did it play out in Grand Rapids or in other parts of Michigan?
Yeah, so I'll answer that last question first and segue into answering the first part of your question. So locally, Palestine Solidarity Grand Rapids organized against both the Democrats and the Republicans. We saw the two parties as different, absolutely, but in terms of Palestinian liberation, neither of them was very good. To say, put it gently. So we were part of the coalition to march against the Republican National Convention in Milwaukee last summer. We sent organizers to Milwaukee on the ground to help do outreach and organize those efforts. We were also part of the coalition to march against the Democratic National Convention in Chicago as well, and sent a large contingent to march with those folks. And so, politically, Biden is a committed lifelong Zionist. Trump is an opportunist and a narcissist who lacks any sort of civility and decorum. There are obvious political differences, at least in name, between the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. But ultimately, our line for Palestine Solidarity Grand Rapids was to vote against genocide, because both parties supported and uplifted the genocide. It just so happens that it's a matter of scale and saying the quiet part out loud. Biden increased military spending to Israel to unprecedented numbers under his administration. And Trump wants to engage in an all-out extermination campaign, right? So they both support the genocide of Palestinian people. It's just a matter of scale and scope. And Trump is just a loudmouth. So he's willing to eschew civility and decorum, whereas the Democratic Party relies heavily on that sort of liberal aesthetic, that ethics of niceness. And so they'll quietly fund a genocide and take AIPAC money and lie boldly and subvert the truth to keep their public image just a little bit cleaner. But historically, they set the stage for the current Holocaust, and we could not, in good conscience, vote for that. So locally, we organized against Kamala Harris. We she had a campaign stop in Michigan. Sometime in late fall, and we had an all-day action against her campaign stop. We were outside handing out flyers and leaflets to the thousands of people who showed up to see her speak. We chanted across the pond so they could hear us, and we could project our anti-democrat, anti-imperialist, anti-genocide message to Kamala Harris directly. People from her campaign came out and told us we weren't allowed to pass out flyers. And it got a little heated at one point, but ultimately, over the last 20 months, we have developed a large group of organizers in Grand Rapids to resist that sort of liberalism that says that we shouldn't speak up against the atrocities that the United States is committing. We have, between 30 and 50 committed core organizers in Palestine Solidarity Grand Rapids. We have seen hundreds of people come through as organizers in the last 20 months, and we've seen probably thousands of people in West Michigan through our education, our teach-in events, our cultural events, documentary screenings, rallies, direct actions against war profiteers, conferences that we've been to. And so we have built a very strong anti-imperialist movement in West Michigan. I think that had a large impact on voter turnout, generally speaking, not necessarily our efforts, but the efforts of people to raise consciousness around Palestine. I said earlier that West Michigan is becoming a little bit more progressive, but ultimately our swing toward voting Democrat lately is not necessarily because West Michigan is turning left, but because the Democratic Party is turning right. And so they're able to capture more of those centrist Republican voters who maybe want to fancy themselves part of the working class and supporters of unions and that sort of thing. But the Democrats aren't even supporters of the working class or supporters of unions. In Michigan as a whole, we see that Trump overtly lied to Arab voters. One of the largest Islamic centers on the East Side, the imam openly supported Trump's election prior to him being elected. He and the I don't know if it was the Islamic Center itself that endorsed or if it was just this imam who endorsed Trump, but he posted an Instagram reel basically saying, "This is why I'm voting for and endorsing Trump." Because they're so disillusioned at the lies, the bold-faced lies that the Democratic Party was telling ahead of the election. They wouldn't even allow a Palestinian to stand on the stage at the Democratic National Convention, let alone speak to the genocide, because so many of them are funded and in bed with Zionist PACs that they can't. If they want to continue to have a political career, they can't say anything. It's only the people who are not accepting PAC money, like Rashida Tlaib, who are willing and able to speak out, because people like Rashida Tlaib are funded by small donors. She can do that because she is in a primarily Arab area. Her constituency is dominantly Arab. And so if she wants to have a political career, she has no choice but to speak out. But ultimately, she is a Palestinian woman and she supports the self-determination of her people. And so it is her moral responsibility to do that and to support her constituency. I think, it's challenging in the state of Michigan because it is a swing state, but it's also, as you said, there are people of conscience who live here, and ultimately it wasn't individual voters at fault for the Democratic Party's loss in Michigan. It was the Democratic Party itself. They failed their base. They've been shifting farther and farther right, and they quietly gave Israel billions and billions of dollars over the last couple of years. And I think that ultimately is going to lead to their demise as a party.
Yeah, yeah, no, I think I agree with you. I mean, it's hard right now to see, Trump's deporting people and just militarizing the country. But it's like it's you can't just say, well, we don't, we'll tolerate genocide because of some of these domestic issues. We really need to come up with a real alternative for working class people.
And they're all interlinked, right? As I said
Yes.
earlier, all of our struggles are interlinked. So yes, it's absolutely hard to see what Trump is doing against our immigrant communities, our queer and trans communities. But these things were also quietly happening under the Democrats, right? We have this sort of stair step effect that happens when we swing back and forth between the Democrats and the Republicans, where the Republicans are very bold and they, like I said, they say that quiet part out loud because they're racist, they're bigoted, they lack civility and decorum, and they just don't care. Whereas the Democrats kind of capitulate to the Republicans' base, and they'll do things like militarize the border and increase people who are incarcerated at the border. And that happens under the Democrats. And then the Republicans regain power and they become even more emboldened and they make it worse and worse. And we just keep swinging back and forth. And it's not getting better because both of those parties are owned by billionaires. And they capitulate to the monopoly capitalists of the world. And frankly, those monopoly capitalists of the world are US interests. So it's not until we build a party that is for the people, that believes in social power, that we will actually see an effective change against these billionaire interests.
Yeah, no, well put. I want to ask you about, one of the main tactics that the movement's been using is BDS, or boycott, divest, sanctions. Could you talk a little bit about what that is and how that works, and why it's important, and how Palestine Solidarity Grand Rapids looks at that?
Absolutely. So, BDS, boycott, divest, sanction, helps collectivize what is normally an individualistic action, right? Boycotting, or the way that an individual person spends their hard-earned money, is usually just that. It's siloed, it's individualistic. But when we do a national or international boycott campaign, it helps collectivize that action and centralize people's power and make real tangible gains against these corporations that are causing harm in the world. And so when we can decide collectively on just a couple of organizations that we are going to say we will not spend money, because these organizations, are directly linked to war profiteering and directly linked to the genocide in Israel and in Palestine. That allows us to use our individual power in a massive collective scale. Divestment, so, boycott is for the individual. Divestment is for governance, right? It's on a local or semi-local, usually statewide level. And then we go up to sanctions, and sanctions is sort of the federal level for this BDS movement. So divestiture involves separating our tax dollars from the companies that benefit from war profiteering. In Michigan, we have the Michigan Divest campaign, and that is a campaign to get the Michigan State Investment Board, or the Michigan Treasury, which controls the public employees, I'm sorry, the public school employee pension fund, to divest from, I think I want to say 10 million. I'm so sorry to my friends in the Michigan Divest committee if I got that wrong, but I'm pretty sure it's a $10 million Israeli government bond. And that was purchased after October 7th, 2023. So Michigan public school employees, that is teachers, it's also various public sector workers that work in public schools. Their retirement savings are directly wrapped up in that $10 million Israeli bond. And so there is a pressure campaign comprised of organizers from all around the state, as well as various faith and interfaith groups that are demanding that the Michigan State Investment Board not renew that $10 million Israeli bond when it comes up for renewal. They purchased that bond after October 7th, so they knew fully well what they were doing. The genocide was already being live streamed on Instagram and TikTok. It was in full swing in the mainstream news media. So when they purchased this bond, they knew what they were doing. So they don't have the innocence and naivety to not take accountability for this. It seems to me that the campaign is going well. We keep getting more and more people on board. We have people who are impacted, who have their retirement savings wrapped up in this war bond, who are horrified that this is happening. And so it has become a true statewide effort to divest our retirement funds in this one specific way. And that could be a major win, right? We've seen major divestment movements across the state of Michigan, from the University of Michigan encampments to Wayne State. Grand Rapids, we've tried to publicly pressure our local city commission to divest from war profiteers, to no avail, unfortunately. The Grand Rapids City Council is a very special beast. It's very particular material conditions here in Grand Rapids. It's easy in places like Dearborn, where the population is majority Arab, to say like this, there's a very clear connection here. Our families are being harmed and affected by the policies that we are instigating and instituting on a local level. It's a little bit more challenging in Dutch majority West Michigan, which has been historically redlined and is, quite racist. The the Grand Rapids City Commission is very much beholden to business interests and the DeVos family, the Van Andel family, and all of these rich, wealthy billionaires who control the power structure of Grand Rapids. I think Dearborn and Detroit have their own local divest movements. I can't necessarily speak to those because I'm not involved in those campaigns, but I think they've had some successes with their divest movements. When it comes to sanctions, it's a little bit more complicated. Sanctions are sort of a national scale thing that are often used to uphold U.S. interests. And it's very, very challenging to get the belly of the beast to, sanction a country like Israel that it is actively supporting. So when it comes to the BDS movement to try to uphold Palestinian liberation, I'm not sure that sanctions on the U.S. are going to be helpful. And until U.S. No longer has veto power in some of these major global organizations like the United Nations, I don't know that anybody is going to try to sanction the U.S. outside of the efforts that China has undergone to sanction individual businesses and to tax these individual businesses that they manufacture parts for, the war profiteers who build the bombs, who build the fighter jets, and who build the tanks in the United States.
Yeah, no, that's good. Yeah, thank you for that. And I think if we look at, I remember, because I'm old, the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa when we fought that, and this was similar tactics of divestiture, and actually Reagan did put some sanctions on South Africa at the very, very, very end. And but it was that was a signal that apartheid was going to fall, and so England as well. So maybe we'll see that in Israel someday. Palestine will be free, and
it's inevitable.
It's inevitable. That's right, and the people's movement just keeps getting stronger. So that's impressive. Unfortunately, our time's running out here. So you've given us a lot to think about and to act on. And so, but before we go, I want to give you a chance if there's anything else that you want to add before we end the interview.
Yeah, I would love it if people across the Midwest would join us for the March Against Genocide on June 26th to June 30th. This is going to be a major effort to uplift the struggle of children, to uplift the struggle of Palestinian liberation to the media, to raise money for amazing, worthy causes like Heal Palestine and Playgrounds for Palestine. We need people to walk with us. We want folks to take on volunteer roles. We're looking for community members to help provide food. So if you're not able to walk, you may be able to cook. If you're not able to cook and you're too busy to walk, maybe you can donate some money to our GoFundMe campaign. If you want to avoid GoFundMe for whatever reason, you can buy a t-shirt and we'll ship it to you. And all of this information is available on our brand new website, we're excited to say, PalestineSolidarityGR.org.
All right. Yes, so PalestineSolidarityGR.org. Go there right now, everybody. Yes, thank you so much for being our guest on Fight Back Radio, Emerson.
Thank you, Richard. This was a great conversation, and I look forward to keep having these conversations with other people.
Yes, thank you. So we want people to support the March Against Genocide, and any way you can help the Palestine Solidarity Grand Rapids. We're going to put in the show notes how you can get in touch with them. But buy a T-shirt, maybe one of those hot pink ones or whatever. But support our friends at Palestine Solidarity Grand Rapids, and this is an important march. I mean, the money is going to for health care and to build playgrounds, which is something that whatever. I mean, the children of Gaza, if anybody needs a playground and joy, it's them. I'm not sure how far away we are from that. I also encourage people, read Fight Back News, fightbacknews.org, where you can get news and views from the people's struggle, but it'll keep you up to date on what's going on in Gaza and in Palestine. I mentioned at the top of the show that Israel has bombed Iran, and so we, if you stay on top of it through there, learn about protests and pushback and the resistance in your area. Also, I want to remind people before we go off the air of our friend from the Centro CSO, Alejandro Orellana. And Alejandro, as we said at the top of the show, has been arrested. He's been charged with conspiracy to commit civil disorder. They've taken all his electronic devices. This should be a lesson to everybody, too. If the FBI or any law enforcement knocks on your door, and I don't think they knocked on his door. I think they just busted it down. But if they knock on your door, don't talk to them. Lawyer, lawyer, lawyer. And that's, go to the National Lawyers Guild, whatever. You can get it, tell the cop, give me your card. I'll have my lawyer call you. That's all. Don't say anything else. And don't let them into your house, for God's sake, or into your apartment. Before we sign off, I want to thank our music is done by Andy Koch, as always, so thank you, Andy. Also in promotion, we've used some photos from Brad Siegel, who you can find on Facebook and other places with his photos, but he also has a podcast called Red Lens, and so thank you, Brad, for allowing us to use those photos. And then I want to thank our production team, of course, Caetano Silvara, Fayani Obama Mahana, Lane Dorsey, Dodd McColgan, Shane Tremley, and I'm Richard Berg for the entire Fight Back Radio team saying until next time, all power to the people.